Hi, everybody. I'm Scott.
And I am Luke.
And I'm Jonathan.
And this is the No Way to Hollywood podcast. Sorry, Jonathan. I can't stop laughing at that face you just made. Can you do that again for our viewers?
And I'm Jonathan.
Yeah, there it is. Isn't that great?
I know that some of you might be struggling to recognize me. It's because I just got my hair cut. My hair was hilarious.
Who are you?
Yeah.
Who are you?
So thanks for being here. I even shaved my beard.
I said I am Luke. And that's not how Luke says his name. That's not how he intros. Scott, eject him from the podcast.
No, I refuse.
What?
Be kind, rewind.
What is happening right now?
We've derailed. It's been about approximately 30 seconds, and we have derailed.
He said eject, and made me think of a VCR. And then I thought of renting videos like I did when I was a kid on VHS tapes, which
you're showing your age, Scott. All of our age.
Were there dinosaurs there too? Did the dinosaurs use the VCR, or was that after them?
Be kind, rewind.
Was that the dinosaur phrase, or?
Oh goodness!
So well tonight. Thank you.
All right, Jonathan. Let you get started with maybe some news out of Hollywood.
The news out of Hollywood. It's gonna become a new segment. It's right now, and
I'm trying to give you some music. I don't know.
Thank you. Yes, today in the news from Hollywood is Mulan. Live action Mulan. You may have heard of this movie back when movies were still potentially going to come out when they were advertising them. And Mulan, live action remake from Disney. We actually have an episode on it. If you'll go back to early episodes, back to the single digits, I think in the first 5. I forget which one.
2. I'm pretty sure it was number 2.
It was probably number 2. We're going to trust Scott on this. If he's wrong, leave a comment about that or really anything else. We'd love any comments from you. But Mulan was delayed just like every other movie in 2020 that, showed up and wanted to have a release date after COVID became a serious deal. So what are they doing with Mulan? Well, Disney, who I understand it, is reporting a $5 billion loss for this year. And has no parks open and all that kind of fun stuff.
Wait, was that million or billion?
I believe I read billion. The House of Mouse is fairly loaded, Yeah. So anyway, they have announced that they will release Mulan on September 4th of this year. How they are going to do that is they are going to use their streaming service, Disney Plus, which costs $6 to subscribe to and have access to. And that maintains, you still have to spend the $6 to get access to Mulan. But on top of that $6, you will not be able to own Mulan, but you will be able to rent Mulan for the added cost of $30.
What?
Yeah, $30.
Okay, so you're telling me I'm already paying Disney, well, let's see, $6 a month times 12 is what, like 72?
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, that's another. So you're basically $100 a year for Disney plus Mulan. I mean, if they're losing $5 billion this year, they might actually make a few billion back by doing that.
Billion, no, but I did quick calculations. As I read recently, it seems there's somewhere around 60 million subscribers on Disney Plus. So if they maintain that 60 million, and let's just say only half of them decide to rent Mulan at $30. They're not sharing that money with anybody. It's all going to the House of Mouse. And anybody you share with a theater, nothing like that. So on rough calculations, I believe that came out to something like $900 million if only 30 million people paid for it once. So if half a subscriber base paid for it one time, that'd be almost $1 billion they made off of Mulan. The movie cost them $200 billion to make, and then whatever advertising that was completely and utterly wasted on people because they didn't release it for another 6 months.
Okay, Luke, justify this cost to me. I don't buy it.
$30? Well, yeah, you're not buying it. You're renting it once for a 24-hour period, probably. Like, you can push play once and watch it. the reason why it makes sense for families to spend money like $30 for this is if you're going to go to the theater with your 2 children, it was going to cost you over $30 anyway. So this is actually a screaming deal for you.
So does that mean that we are moving towards a time when we aren't going to have theaters anymore, but we're going to pay $30 to be able to rent a movie for that's a new release?
So I think it's important to think about distribution and owning versus licensing, right? Because when we buy a DVD, right, we in the past, when you used to buy these digital versatile discs, you know, like you would own the physical like product thing, but you did not own the media on it. You were licensing the media on it. That is the legal ramifications of that. So when we buy a DVD, we are physically buying the right to watch this movie whenever we want with this disc, but we don't actually own the movie, which means that the industry actually really looks down on you ripping that DVD and putting it on your computer, because that is a separate license, which is why they started releasing finally like the combo discs, right? Where you would get the movie that you could watch with a license on your disc, and you could get the movie with a license that you could watch on your, you know, platform of whatever, right? Like you could download it and have the digital copy.
Yeah. So this
now
changed.
With streaming, we're not
Right.
renting anything. You're not owning anything. You are paying for the license to push play and watch the thing. And that's what's going on here. You are not renting the movie. You are paying $30 for the license to stream it at any given point in time for a 24-hour period or whatever the thing ends up being. And so for $30, your family, the whole family, can watch it. And that might be cheaper than going to the theater. Probably cheaper than going to the theater.
But not as good of an experience.
I mean, unless your system is awesome.
Yeah,
Working on it.
Someone wants to donate to us below so that I can get a better system, I would appreciate that. And then I would not have to go to movies ever. Oh, wait. There's probably not a donate link below. I'm sorry, guys.
I can add a bit of text that says donate and maybe even like put brackets around so it looks like a button. But you don't need to donate to us. I mean, you can, but yeah.
All right. Now that we've figured that one out, we're going to go ahead and jump into our topic for the night. We had such success earlier talking about the science fiction genre. We've decided to find another genre to talk about tonight. So sit back and relax and just, take
I know
it
you weren't
easy.
earlier.
Take
Sit
it
back now.
easy. Just, kind of drift off into sleep as we talk about horror movies.
Because this episode is going to be so interesting, you're going to be able to sleep through it.
I did not say
It's
that.
so relaxing. Scott told them to relax. If they fall asleep, they're just listening to what Scott asked them to do. You can put it on the moderator if you're really going to have an issue with it.
All right. So maybe we should try and start out by defining what a horror movie is.
I like this idea.
Jonathan,
Okay.
go.
Oh, yeah, go, Jonathan. But first, I want to just say, you're going to define it, but I'm going to say there's actually a bunch of subgenres within horror, and those are kind of important to talk through, I think, as we start talking about the broader concept of what is horror in the first place. But you've got several of those different things. You've got your psychological thriller kind of thing, where it's like, whoa, what's going to happen? How's this going to work? You've got kind of your jump scare, just kind of like adrenaline thing, like, oh, we're going to pop out at you. You've got your like sicko gross out stuff where it's just like, wow, that was disgusting. Ugh, I'm horrified at it. You've got your torture porn, which is like, we just like chopping up people and showing you all the blood and guts and how horrible that is. Okay, so like you've got all these different things, as well as kind of like the quintessential horror movie, which is kind of like the horror comedy type thing where like it's like tense, but then it's funny, but then whatever. So yeah. Okay, so those are some of the subgenres.
Okay. I went ahead and Googled
Wow, good
the
job.
definition of the horror as a genre. Okay. According to Wikipedia, the all-knowing,
Wow. Yep.
horror horror, horror,
Horror.
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 Horror is a genre of speculative fiction. Wow, guys, that's all.
That's it?
No,
That's their definition?
I'm just speculative fiction, which is intended to frighten, scare, disgust, or startle its readers, or I would say viewers, by inducing feelings of horror and terror. Horror is frequently supernatural, though it might also be non-supernatural.
Wow.
This definition probably needs some work.
Well, okay, but the bones are there, right? Like, here is a type of media that is designed to make you feel icky.
Here's another Wikipedia article about the film genre horror. It says a horror film is a film that seeks to elicit fear for entertainment purposes, initially inspired by literature from authors such as Edgar Allan Poe, Bram Stoker, and Mary Shelley. So, clearly, according to the definition I'm finding here on Wikipedia, the intent of horror is to, let me read this again, to frighten, scare, disgust, or startle. To induce fear for entertainment purposes. Scott, tell me how much you like to be startled, grossed out, disgusted, and terrified for entertainment. How much do you enjoy that?
Slim to none is the correct answer to this question. And there are a lot of strange people in this world that think differently than I do, and I'm not sure why. I don't get it.
Okay, well, two thoughts for me. I have recently gone back through some of this older horror. So, like, I finally read Frankenstein. And, like, it's just, maybe it was scary back then. Like, it doesn't. Like, you're like, what? Okay. And they do things. Like, it's definitely a book of its time where, like, you go on this travelogue and, like, recount somebody's history and, like, all this stuff. It's very interesting.
I'm starting to get a rule, Luke, that is, if you're going to say something's not scary or not this, you don't think it fits in this genre, I need to know, what is your standard? Is there something that is scary for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been scared about things in the past, but when I look at, like, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it's not particularly scary. Now, I guess there are things in it that are kind of horrifying, like, you create something because you're really interested in something, and then it ends up being this monstrosity, and you're like, wow, I hate it. And then it's like, why do you hate me? You made me. You should love me. And then it's like, if you don't love me or at least take good care of me, I'm going to kill everybody that you care about. So I guess that's kind of like, oh no, that would kind of suck. But I don't know. Maybe I'm too desensitized. I don't know.
Once again, I'd like to ask you, Luke, what might you find horrifying or scary? What is your standard as of now of scary? What still scares you? Preferably a film or a book. I don't really care if you're scared of the dark.
Right. Yeah. Books are interesting. I'm not sure how to get, like, horror out of that, but I haven't read enough of, like, the Goosebumps or anything like that to really understand what that is. It really wasn't my thing as a kid. Movies that really, like, me, and I don't know if they do anymore because, again, desensitized. But I really did not like Congo when I watched that. Like, it was gross. It was disgusting. Like, somebody catches an eyeball and it's like, and, like, that's just gross, right? Like, I just was not okay with that. I found The Birds when I watched it alone by myself on campus in college. Like, that was tense. I was like, whoa.
Well, I mean, yeah, but we're going back to something that's a little more what I would consider actually maybe some of the better stuff in the horror genre.
Okay. Well, and, like, Signs is good and tense, right? And he's totally building off of Hitchcock. And then I think I saw The Ring, and, like, that didn't really scare me too much, but there were definitely tense moments. I think the scenes that actually make me the most tense, afraid. I don't know. It's more about when is it going to happen, right? So like in Signs, when like he gets the knife out and he goes and sticks it under the door, like that kind of stuff, just like, oh, I don't need this. I do not need this in my life. Way too much tension right now because he's going to grab it. Somebody's going to get their fingers chopped off. You know, like that I don't like.
Jump scares, I'm with you. There was
Definitely no
a
jump scares.
there was a
Whatever.
movie, what was it, like The Nun or something like that, that came out somewhat recently, and the whole preview was very much built up to a jump scare. They like literally showed it coming, and then they hit you from the side instead, right? So it was oh my gosh, I see the jump scare, I see it coming, and then they hit you from a different angle. I literally got to the point in watching just the preview where I would literally close my eyes in the movie theater and not watch the preview because I knew how much it would just make my stomach turn.
Sure. Okay. But why some people like horror or why people do this. And I don't know if I know which video essay or actual essay I read or watched on this, but their hypothesis was that horror is an opportunity for people to process the nastiness of life in a safe, somewhat detached and funny environment kind of thing where you can kind of go through that. And so one of the things that they talked about is high school is such a horrible time for a lot of people. And you're in this really bad environment where there's adults, but they're really aloof and disconnected from you. You are constantly in danger, either truly physically or at least emotionally vulnerable through this whole experience. And so they said, so all these horror movies set in high school are set to help you kind of process through that experience. Now, I don't think any of those helped me process through my experience, but I was like, that's an interesting theory, right? Like horror is designed to help you kind of grapple with the horrors of reality and the lives that we lead. But you know, that's just one theory. I don't know. So people
That's a,
like it for that.
I think that's a pretty interesting premise, though, and I like the concept of what that is. And as you were kind of spelling that out for us, it was one of those. What does it say about who I am as an individual if the horror I like is one of these particular subgenres that we can kind of explore? And what does it mean if someone else prefers a different subgenre?
I think there's a lot you can do as far as trying to, like you just said, try to figure out people's personalities or what they're interested in or what they're trying to process through, depending on the subgenre of horror, let alone any genre and or subgenre and what the kind of stories they like. There's a lot to learn about people. But I think it's interesting. I still feel like the horror definition isn't super strong, just because war movies have sequences, at least, if not entire movies, where things are horrible. Things are intended to disgust you and to frighten you and horrify you. But it's a war movie. It's a drama. It's not the same kind of thing as what we might typically consider to be a horror movie. So what is the difference? And in one of those, it mentioned that the horror films or horror stories often deal with the supernatural, although there's those that don't, but they often do. And I find that personally, the horror films that I find myself enjoying often do deal with supernatural, and it's not like horror is the only genre that deals with the supernatural, not by a long shot, but it has such a mainstay there that you can get to some really interesting things, or it's a lot more conceptually interesting to me, I suppose, than a lot of other stories that might never really get quote unquote focused on spiritual things. And again, I say spiritual, but a lot of horror movies, feign spirituality, but really it's a monster that you can't see, right? It's a demon that you can't see. It's invisible. Well, great. It's a demon that's invisible. It's not really about spirituality or the consequences of that. Now, other times it is. Other times it's totally about what does that mean and what's going on with the person's mind and their spirituality and their faith. And that's so both those things happen. But as I think about, I'm considering reading through some titles that are horror films and seeing if see a little bit more clearly what might, because I'm thinking genre convention stuff, but like, you're trying to find it intended to frighten you and deals with spiritual stuff. Okay. But is there something else that we can add to that definition to make it truly what people think of when they think of horror movies? And so some classics I can think of off the bat is, yes, Alfred Hitchcock's, you're talking like Psycho and The Birds. That's some classic stuff. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is a relatively recent one in a lot of ways. Which makes me think of Mike Flanagan and Dr. Sleep and some of the stuff that he's done. But, you've got Alien. Alien's a science fiction horror film. You've got Predator, which is an action horror film. You've got what are the classics? There's The Conjuring's pretty new. There's
you've got The Exorcist, right?
Yes, and that's what I was trying. Yes,
and then with Exorcist, you've got The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which is like the more modern take on the same kind of thing. And those, like, it's interesting thinking about what are the stories about, right? Because you've got the stories of, here is someone who has lost their way in who they are, and then they go through this horrible experience, and then they come out on the other side being like, no, I know who I am again, right? And that's true also of things like Seven, right? And things like that. And there is a video essay on that, so I'll link that below, where it's you're giving up, but then nope, you're going to stay. And this horrible experience helped solidify that for you somehow. So that's kind of cool.
I mean, recently, 2017, there was an adaptation of Stephen King's It that people really flocked to. John Carpenter's iteration of The Thing back in 1982. That's a pretty solid horror movie. I actually really like that one. The Silence of the Lambs in 1991. That's actually a really good movie, considered to be a horror movie by some. Halloween, I think it's Mike Myers, right? Is the idea of the mask and the knife, butcher knife kind of thing. Or, classic is for the slasher horror genre. You've got Friday the 13th and Jason Voorhees and all of that kind of stuff. Even like I was even thinking Stranger Things has a lot of genres that it plays with, but Stranger Things absolutely has horror elements in it. It's one of the core things that's been there from the beginning of Stranger Things. The Evil Dead films, which lead the Army of Darkness, Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell doing some cheesy B-movie stuff, but Evil Dead 1 and Evil Dead 2 are well known as Evil Dead 1 being more of a gross out true horror film, and Evil Dead 2 being kind of gross out horror film with a lot of comedy in a weird way. Which leads to the other things that I really like Cabin in the Woods, which is a very strong comedy horror film that's a meta-narrative dissecting and looking at the horror genre itself. And what's fascinating is I don't think of myself as much of a typical horror movie fan. I've been growing in it over the years, but I saw Cabin in the Woods years ago, and I totally understood all the genre conventions they were subverting or pointing out or making fun of. Because there's something about the horror narrative, the Cabin in the Woods, a bunch of teenagers going to do stuff. The monster shows up. The kids get stupid. They split up. There's the jock who thinks he can handle everything, but he's really stupid. There's the smart one who's got a good chance of surviving. There's the virgin woman who's going to survive the whole thing. If you have sex in the movie, you're going to die. Like there's all these genre conventions that are in horror movies, specifically in that case, a lot of slasher films, zombie movies, vampire movies.
Right. And so you've got Tucker and Dale versus Evil, right?
Yes!
Which is like the comedy beyond that, right? But then like vampire movies, which is kind of more where I live, but like I'm in the foreign ones, right? So like Let the Right One In, the American remake didn't understand what the original was about, I believe, and so therefore like lost all heart, which is true for most adaptations. It's really sad. Okay, and then you've also got things like Night Watch, Day Watch, that whole set, which is great, like totally redonkulous Russian, like yeah, go team. So yeah, you've got like the creature features almost on that side of things, but often those are about the human, right? The human aspect of it, and that's really what all of those kind of monster horror movies are about, are exploring humanity in the context of all the horror monstery type things that are out there, which is then played out in all this other media that's currently popular and stuff. So yeah.
Considering some of these films and some of these genres, these many different genres, do you guys have a personal definition or something to add to the definition that we've been working off of so far to refine it, to make it a little bit closer to what we experience when we talk about these various movies? Is something that unites them beyond, quote unquote, trying to frighten an audience for entertainment value?
Well, I think it's important to note that while war movies have scenes and aspects that are horrible, but like the point is not this horror moment, right? It's just war happens to also be horrible, but then there's also these other things that are going on, right? Whereas a horror movie, right? Like you've got the opening of Saving Private Ryan, which is truly horrifying. But as much as that is like torture porn, because it's so much torture and horror, that's not the point of the movie, and that's not where it's going. Whereas like Hostel or whatever, which I haven't seen, but like that's the point. Like we're just going to sit here and make people suffer physically. And
sure.
Yeah. So the point of the film, I think, is what matters. Another thing that's kind of come up for me as you've been going through this and we've talked, I think, is another aspect of horror movies is often this like humanity and like who are we and where are we going kinds of questions. Those are the kinds of things that it likes to explore. Like what's with the human psyche and what's with us and why do we make the choices that we make and things like that. I think that's where it tends to go on that side of things. Like what are motivations, stuff like that.
Horror movies have a unique ability because they are about, in a lot of ways, creating tension, fear, and whatnot. They have monsters or villains that are easily overpowering and quickly overpowering and hunting usually pretty quickly. Not always, but often. And usually it's a strong way to have a narrative because your main character or characters are relatively quickly thrown into a corner with many obstacles to overcome, even if it's just to survive. They have to, like, it's very harrowing. It's a crucible for any of these characters in a horror film. I mean, even let's talk Jaws. I think Jaws is fundamentally structured in a lot of ways as a horror film. There's some action. There's a good drama going on. I think it's pretty good. I think you can get kids to watch Jaws if you really want to. You could probably get away with it because it's tame enough in the right ways. But it's absolutely got a horror narrative. There is a shark in the water. It's a monster. It's coming to kill you. What do you do about it? And you have to go face it. That's the other thing that horror movies typically deal with is whether the hero is going to succeed or fail, whether the villain will live on forever, even if it's defeated or not. You have to go face the evil. You have to. It's always the thing that goes down in these stories. You can maybe try to escape, but
that makes me think of like Battle Royale, right? Where like that's a teen horror movie, right? Like before they went and made the American, Catching Fire and all that jazz. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how there are. I mean, we've talked about possible different genres, but there's also like, okay, what kind of tension are we building here? Is it a physical, like a physical tension like you get in Jaws, like you don't want to die, so don't get eaten by the shark? Is it more of a mental one like we get in, I mean, there are psychological thrillers, but I would say even there's some psychological thrillers that aren't horror and some that are. I mean, I think more of the Jordan Peele films in terms of psychological thrillers that are horror movies. And it's like there's going to be certain things that are a reaction I'm okay with having, and certain things that are a reaction I would rather not experience. And I realize just how different that is for so many different people as well. So, yeah, horror genre is a weird genre for me in that it also kind of puts us in a place where the things that affect us are so different compared to the things that affect us from other genres.
I think that horror films require a certain level of discomfort. I think that that's part of the intent, like, trying to make you frightened, sure, but I think there's a certain level of you need to be uncomfortable with something. And that's part of what I kind of like about it in a dramatic way is that it can deal with subjects that are uncomfortable and discomforting and horrible and I can watch characters rise above it. I can watch characters deal with it. There's good things that can happen. There's redemption and good things that can happen in it. Doesn't mean that that's the trope. The trope is actually the opposite. The characters do their best and are bad too, and everybody dies, or they didn't really succeed, or evil's still out there. It's often a trope as well, right? But when they do, Stephen King, the thing from his stories that I know and have looked at, one of the things about him is while he can be nihilistic, he can also be very hopeful. He makes really horrible, terrifying things happen to people with a lot of spiritual, like a mystery to it, and it's just really hard to deal with. Really horrible, puts his characters in corners, and he's nasty to them. But he also gives them humanity, and he has a heart in a sense with his authorship, and he wants to see those characters face these things and somehow grow, somehow get beyond it, suffer pain and loss, and yet find a way to be better and move on. What was the movie? There was a movie I was thinking. And there's movies like Paranormal Activity. I went and saw Paranormal Activity in the theaters. I was a teenager. It was a horror movie that was kind of it was taking a grassroots approach to its marketing, saying, demand it to come to our theater. I demanded it, and it came out. I said, I'll go with my high school friends, and we'll go watch this. I've never really watched a horror movie in the theater. Let's just try this, and can't be, whatever. And for me, other of my friends were like, doors are moving. This movie is stupid. But for me, the concept took hold, and the whole movie was an up and down adrenaline rush of here's this thing. And to me, it was, can you figure out the rules of what you're dealing with? Can you find out what this monster is? Can you figure out the rules, and can you deal with it, or will you die? Spoiler alert, Paranormal Activity is a classic horror film. Everybody dies. Everything bad happens to everybody. You don't win against this thing, which is logical in that story. But it was just a series, and that we talked earlier about why do people want to do this to themselves. I really believe that people who get adrenaline rushes, especially if they get an adrenaline rush from being scared, jump scares, fear, they love this crap. They love it. They love to go and be scared so that they can get the feeling of adrenaline rush. And that's another whole part of this.
And I do not. I don't like roller coasters either. So the adrenaline rush thing is just not for me. I'm not an adrenaline junkie. There was it was a short film that I saw. Maybe I can find a link to it. It was something like, The Thing in Jennifer's Room or something. And so it's just a monster movie, right? It's a short where a girl is scared because something was in her room. They go and find the thing, and it's a monster, and right. And what's fascinating to me as a filmmaker is, how do you make a door creaking scary? How do you make moving down a hall scary? And those things impress me. And when I'm not being impressed, I'm just feeling stressed. I'm like, no, thank you. I've got enough stress in my life.
But you bring up a great point, which is I think that horror movies, because they have to often do so much with so little, I got a $6,000 budget and I'm going to make millions of dollars because I can use this. It is not only really good craft often, but it is about, like, story wise and craft wise, it's about concept. It's all about making people buy into a concept that makes you scared and get into the position of the character, so that when the door creaks, it's not that the door is creaking, it's what the door creaking means, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have made everything that happens now, every sound that happens, every scene you see now means something, whether it signifies the monster's coming or even just the paranoia of a character. It represents something that you are afraid is coming. And I mean, horror movies can tackle all sorts of crazy subjects. Like The Babadook deals with a certain level of grief and depression that a single mother's going through, having lost her husband and trying to raise her kid, and all the pain, suffering, and depression and grief that comes along with it. And the Babadook monster is literally a representation of those feelings that character has, and how do you conquer that? And it's interesting where it goes with that. It's not my favorite horror movie by any stretch, but it's what it's dealing with, and that's where horror can be really good, even if you're not a horror fan. I think because it can really deal with and things you're scared of, things people grieve and go through, things that are hard, just uncomfortable, horrifying, and it can do it in a way that lets a concept take hold and ideas take hold, and that's why you get so scared, because your own mind works against you.
Sure. One of the things that you kind of mentioned there in that last thing that I think I'd like to talk about is a lot of the technical side of making a horror film, because I think there are definitely some lighting techniques that I've really come to appreciate more. And part of it's that, when are we most afraid? It's at night when it's dark outside. So now we're going to put some low light situations and try and figure out how to create tension. But the way that you can use lighting to create tension, the way that you can use sound to create tension is, I mean, to me, that's the fascinating side of what the horror genre is, of how they use these little things to create more tension in a given situation.
And a video essay below on the lighting in Haunting of Hill House, and it's brilliant. It's great.
Haunting Hill House is really good. It's really good. But yeah, you're talking about lighting. I mean, obviously, darkness is an easy one. But thinking about the birds, going back to the birds, one of the best chilling scenes I think is it's broad daylight, and the main character, she is trying to pick up a girl from school or something like that. I forget. It doesn't matter to me ultimately, but she's trying to pick up some kids from school. The kids are in class. She's waiting for them. They're in class in like the school church of the small town, and next to that is a playground. And she sits on the bench. And what Hitchcock does through a series of very specific framing shots and editing is he has already established that birds are getting weird, right? The movie's called The Birds. You know it's something wrong. So even if you don't know the whole context of the scene, just watching the scene is effective. Of little by little, a bird appears. And there's this one bird she starts to watch, and it's acting kind of funny, and she's paying attention to it, and she's really concerned. And in the whole thing of the reveal of the bird that she's really paying attention to, and she sees a couple of them in front of her, she's like, oh my gosh. And they fly behind her, and she watches it as it flies behind her, and it lands in the playground. And the playground that was once completely abandoned is now got like 100 crows sitting on the playground stuff. And it's chilling. They're not doing anything. They're not doing a darn thing. But you know that something's wrong. And the way that he reveals information to you through pacing, through what he shows you how he reveals things to you, is what makes it so fascinating. And that's one thing. If you can learn anything from horror, I think you can learn how and when to reveal something for maximum impact, at least for fear and tension. But learning how to reveal something is a very powerful filmmaking tool.
I agree. And maybe, and I love that we're talking about the positives of what horror has brought to filmmaking in general, because ultimately, as much as I might dislike a majority of this genre, I can still really appreciate, and that's probably part of the reason I would appreciate something like Hitchcock, is the way he shoots, the way he frames, the way he lights, the way he does all of that stuff is just very masterful. I mean, it honestly, if you're looking for how to do horror right and how to make movies really well, that's where you need to go.
At the same time, I have to say that what I find fascinating about Hitchcock too is, sure, he's done horror films like Psycho. You can't argue that Psycho is not a horror film. It's just that Hitchcock is a master of tension. I mean, that's what I love about Hitchcock. Hitchcock understands no matter what genre of film he's making a tension movie. He knows how to build tension and how to reveal things. So that's the really valuable tool you get from Hitchcock.
Well, and horror is also good as a genre for, young, poor filmmakers, because for $6,000 you can make something crazy, right? And that's harder to do in other genres sometimes, because you need good actors, or you need amazing sets, or you need whereas here it's like you can literally go into the woods with a couple of your friends who can't act, and you can make a movie that makes a ton of money, right? Like,
Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like you can just go do that. And you create a new genre then, right? Like the found footage genre, which then shows up again in Cloverfield, right? Like, awesome.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, gentlemen, we are wrapping up here now. So let's come up with a suggestion of maybe something we've mentioned, because Luke already stole mine, and maybe something we haven't mentioned that maybe shows our personal taste in the horror genre.
Okay, well then, If you are up for a movie with gratuitous amounts of nudity, I think my favorite horror movie is The Hidden Face. It's Spanish, so it's not Hidden Face. I don't know Spanish well enough, but I love it. Not just because of gratuitous amounts of nudity, but because it actually like starts out feeling like a certain type of horror movie and switches to another kind halfway through the film. And it's one of those flip the world on you movies, which I just love. I love that. If you're not up for gratuitous amounts of nudity, I would say go check out Night Watch or Day Watch, whichever one's first. Night Watch. And yeah, it's got a lot of whacked out style, and it's really weird and Russian, and yeah, awesome. Go for it.
Jonathan?
I'll give you two because I think I just thought of a couple. One that I really like is Doctor Sleep. That title is not doesn't tell you anything, and it is a sequel to the movie The Shining and the book The Shining by Stephen King. Stephen King wrote a book called Doctor Sleep, and I think it does help to know, have seen The Shining, which is a very different kind of film to Doctor Sleep, but Doctor Sleep, it's vicious. It's got incredibly vicious, disturbing stuff that goes on in that film, but it's also got redemption, and it's got some really, I think, powerful things that it does that I really like. And I think filmmaking wise, it's done very, very well. And I enjoy it quite a bit on that level. But it also has scenes, if not, it has multiple scenes that make me go, oh, still. And I own the movie because I think it's very good. But it's an uncomfortable, disturbing watch. And I understand that's like, why would I want to watch that? Because there's other things that are really good. And ultimately, also, it's about addiction. And it's about getting over things. And it's got some really human stuff going on while it has spiritual things going on. The other one that I want to mention that I personally believe is actually a horror film is a movie called Whiplash. Whiplash is not what you would typically think of as a horror film. It is not violent in the sense of lots of blood and guts. It's not a slasher film. It's not particularly spiritual. It's not got a lot of the things that we're talking about. But I'll tell you this. It is at the very least designed to stress you out, if not to frighten you and to freak you out. It is about a drummer in a school trying to learn jazz drumming at a college professional level, if you will, going through dealing with a teacher, played by J.K. Simmons, who is straight up abusive to his students. It's got a lot of stress, a lot of tension, and I even think the ending is one of the most exhilarating feelings I think you get in a movie. I think it's done very well. You are exhilarated by the end of that movie. And I think if you think about it more than 3 seconds, you'll realize that the horror film trope is there of, and now the cycle of evil continues. That's all I'll say about that.
Interesting.
It's at least a tragedy if it's not a horror movie. So
yeah.
Absolutely. So for my personal taste, I do tend to lean more towards the comedic side of this category. So, Luke, your mention of Tucker and Dale versus Evil was going to be my suggestion for tonight. It's definitely got a lot of blood and guts, but it's, in my opinion, just absolutely hysterical, and I enjoy it. Along that lines, I can throw Zombieland in there as well, even though I doubt that it's really ever trying to be horror outside of the fact that zombies exist. But you typically get that. I think I've recommended some other good zombie movies before, but the hidden gem that I would like to recommend for you tonight is a movie called Bubba Hotep. And are you laughing because you know it, or are you laughing because you have no clue what it's about to be?
I have seen Bubba Hotep, and it disappointed me because I thought it was going to be more funny than it was.
I would agree with that sentiment. The concept is brilliant, but ultimately it does fall a little flat for me. But I still think it's worth watching. I want to give you guys the premise just so that you can get as excited about it as I was until I finally watched it. Elvis Presley and Black JFK are in an old folks' home together and must fight off the undead.
I think I'll probably just watch High School of the Dead again. I don't know.
Also, just know that it's the old folks because they didn't die. They didn't die of the causes that you think they did. They survived those things and just used that so they could get away from everybody.
Yes. On that note, we're going to get away from you. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
But not like catch, like horror-wise. Like you'll just come and watch us again, we hope, because you think that we're awesome. Because we think you're awesome.
And just like a horror film, if you found all of this to be terrifyingly uninteresting and boring and you don't like it, just know we're going to keep going. Bye, everybody.
Bye.